Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Reshma, and you should be in the My Life, My Story workshop. Right now, that starts at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So if you will just join in and we will get started with a mindfulness practice. And I'm going to turn my camera off so we can be mindful. So let's start by settling into a comfortable position and allow your eyes to close or keep them open with a softened quick gaze and both feet flat on the ground. Checking in for a moment with the sensations of the body. What emotions may be present in this moment? Notice as best as you can what your mind is doing and letting it be. Just letting yourself be as you are in the moment. Bringing awareness to your breath, noticing the sensations of the breath. Let's begin by taking a few long, slow, deep breaths, breathing in fully and exhaling fully. Allow your breath to find its own natural rhythm, noticing as in the in-breath, as the air enters your nostrils, travels down your lungs, and causes your belly to expand. Now noticing each out-breath as your belly contracts and the air moves up through the lungs, back up through the nostrils or mouth. Noticing how the inhale is different from the exhale. The air going in may be cooler than the air coming out. Perhaps your mind has wandered away from your breath. Simply noticing is being present. Observing and letting the mind be as you bring your attention to your breath again. As this practice comes to an end, slowly allow your attention to expand and notice your entire body. And then beyond your body to the room you're in. When you're ready, open your eyes and thank you for practicing with me. All right. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here to the My Life, My Story workshop. And my name is Reshma. I'm not gonna go deeper into my bio because I'm sure you've seen it when you registered for it. But I'm a nurse educator and I work for the Portland VA Medical Center, which is part of the largest healthcare agency in this country and perhaps in the world as well. We serve a very niche population, and that is the veterans. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our objectives. So the objectives of this workshop is to inform you about this very innovative program that we have at the Veterans Affairs called the My Life, My Story program. It's based on the principles of narrative medicine. And we know from research that narrative medicine is an evidence-based practice that helps improve communication between a provider and a veteran, and it also improves health outcomes. So we'll talk a lot about the program. We will do some practice activities together. There'll be a couple of exercises, a writing exercise, a listening exercise. There'll be several polls. And then we will talk about how you can design a storytelling program in whichever sector you work, whichever population you serve, because this program is very universal in its use. So if you can hold off to your burning questions or you want to put them in the chat, go ahead and do that. But otherwise, please hold off. When we finish, we'll have time for frequently asked questions, and I'll be able to answer your questions. So we'll start off by taking this first poll. And okay, there you go. You've got your poll, and it'll close in about 30 seconds. So go ahead and take the poll. Okay, I see most people are at the 35%. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll here. And it seems like all of you picked 35% as the proportion of adults. Okay, so the results are 100%, 35%, but let me tell you that the correct answer was 9%. And even though you went for 35%, that's probably your anecdotal evidence right there, kicking in your experience with interacting with people. And that probably is right about there. But the correct answer is 9%. But even if it's 9%, it is a whole lot, because the population of the United States is 335 million, and 9% of that is 33 million people are reporting poor communication with their provider. And I think that is the reason why we all are here and we are participating in this conference, because we want to learn how to become better listeners. So what better way to become better listeners is by doing a listening activity. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to read to you a story that was produced as a result of this My Life, My Story program. And I know while we all are different types of learners, I want us to put our best learning gears on, and I'm going to get off the video and I'm going to read the story. The story is about 6 minutes long, so bear with me and I will read the story and we'll talk more about it. So this is the story of Lonnie. My mother was a very strong-willed woman, and she controlled us with an iron hand. If you didn't do what she told you to do, she'd knock you across the room. Because I was a mischievous child, I got tired of being knocked across the room. I didn't learn very well, so one day I was going by the recruiting station. I was only 17, but I went in and volunteered. I used my stepsister's name, which was the same as mine, and she was a couple of years older than me, so they took me right away. We got on the train to go to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, and we arrived there in the afternoon. That evening before bedtime, they played taps, and we were all lined up as they brought the flag down. I thought, that's nice, but it really didn't do anything for me. But the next morning when we went out for reveille, there was something so magical that happened to me when they raised the flag. My heart fluttered like it was a first date. After boot camp, we were shipped to El Paso, Texas, to Biggs Field. My first job was to move a bunch of big trucks from one area of the parking lot to another. I was 17 and I had never driven anything but a car, but I moved those trucks. After that, they had an opening for inspectors on airplanes that had been repaired. I was with the first groups of the Women's Army Corps, or WACs, to graduate from that training school. The men were very resentful of the WACs. You're too young to understand that. They didn't want to go overseas to war, and with us there, it meant they had to. So they got pretty nasty, and after a while I said, I don't have to put up with this. They transferred me to recruiting, and that's where I spent the last part of the war. I met my husband in the service. That was a stroke of luck that I would get such a good man at such a tender age. He was a very serious young man, and I looked at him and I thought, he's so sad. I wonder why he's so sad. I wonder if I could make him happy. And then we got married, and I spent the next 73 years trying to make him happy. I did the best I could. It was sometimes good and sometimes bad. We had our pitfalls. My husband is 97. He loves me very much, he tells me. He can hardly stand to be out of my sight. That's quite amazing after 73 years. We had 5 sons, 5 wonderful sons. My oldest son passed away when he was 57, but my other boys still live in Wisconsin. I love people. That's my saving grace. I love people and I love children. My husband, he loves work. He was in business as an electrician and he had to know exactly what he was doing. He was a perfectionist, let's put it that way. He's a great guy. Underneath it all, he's a pussycat. Right now, I'm having a hard time with my back. When I was younger, I was in a gas explosion, a backfire of a gas furnace. It blew me from one floor down to the next floor. It broke my back and dislocated my organs. I had multiple surgeries to put my bowels and bladder back together. And here I am, I'm still fighting the system. Me and my husband are still living together. To stay married this long, you have got to realize that everybody isn't nice all the time. But just because they're not nice today doesn't mean they won't be nice tomorrow. So just take it and leave it and go on about your business. That's how you survive it. We had some hot arguments, mostly about the kids. Because I was raised so strict, I raised mine too much the other way. It was against his religion to raise them so gentle. They should be whipped, and I didn't believe in any of that. But they turned out pretty good anyway. It doesn't matter really. They're going to be who they're meant to be, no matter what you do or what you say. You learn stuff all the time when you're living. Life is a learning proposition. I always like to tell people this story because it's very influential. I had an afterlife experience in the explosion. It happened when my son Michael was a baby, probably 1955 or 1956, because he was still young. When I hit the floor, I popped out of my body. I'm up on the ceiling looking down. There's a white thread going from me down to the body laying on the floor. The body laying on the floor is like an empty envelope. It's me, but it looks like me. It was such a wonderful feeling. And then Michael let out a yell and I popped back in just like that. If that child hadn't cried, I'd be gone. And here we are today. This is the 3rd time I've been in the Veterans Hospital, and there's no better care on earth than here. They have saved my life a couple of times, but here I am, sassy as ever. And as I talk, all these memories are flooding through my brains. And because I'm not feeling the greatest, I'm a little poorly organized in telling the stories. But I have such great love for the United States, and it goes back to the time when my heart fluttered for the flag going up. That was just such an awesome thing. And when I arrived here Tuesday, I was in such pain. But when I got out of the car to come into the hospital, there was a whole line of soldiers sitting there out in front, and they applauded me. That brought tears to my eyes, and I'm not a crier. It really touched a deep spot. So that's the story. It's kind of hit and miss, and you'll have to do the best you can with it. All right, so we listened to the story. Do people have any reflections that they may want to put in the chat? What did you think? All right, so if you think of something, put it in the chat and I'll go and circle back to it again. But for me, that story was very impactful when I first read it. So now we're going to talk a little bit about why stories. You know, some of your comments, if you put them in the chat, if you responded to the story, you may realize why stories are important because they kind of speak to us as well. We are all human beings and we all have stories. I'm sure each one of you here in this workshop has a story, a very delightful story. Okay, I see some chat coming in. We had a very rich life and her experiences were important for her to share. Yes, very true. Sweet story of a life. Yes, indeed. So let's talk why stories are important. Stories are important because they have a massive healing power. They heal us. And how do they heal us? When you listen to a story, example, if when a provider listens to a story, they deliver more humanistic care. And what is humanistic care? Humanistic care is care that shows empathy, care that listens, care that makes us a better provider, right? So it is, the storytelling is such a powerful art and science that it affects everybody involved in the process of storytelling. When the patient retells their story, they realize about their own resilience. This is a big one. As you heard in Lonnie's story, and as some of you are talking about, one of you say it's a beautiful story, many, many years of marriage, love that she talks about working with the bad and good. Very true. So she is, as she's telling her story, she's also sharing what worked in her life, and that shows her resilience that, yeah, there were some days that were good, some were bad, and nobody's going to love you all the time. Some days they will, show it a little more, some days no. So she is, as she's telling her story, she's realizing her resilience and she's sharing it with the provider. And then when a patient retells their story, there is healing that is taking place in your mind, in your body and spirit. You're going through all those memories, like when she says that all these memories are circling in and she's remembering them, and she's probably even astonished at herself. And as she's doing that, she's healing, because one of the mindfulness research talks about when we savor good memories, we are healing ourselves. It's like you heal. Her story lets us empathize with her to find common ground to make a connection on a personal level. Thank you for that. That is very true. So I wanted to share some quotes from both sides of the aisle. And right now, the 5-year post-implementation study research says that 94% of the staff indicated that they had read the My Life, My Stories in the electronic health records of the patient. And over 86% agreed or strongly agreed that reading those stories was a good use of their clinical time and for them to provide better care. So this is just a few quotes. The provider says, the things they said have changed how I look at things. It's changed who I am. Pretty powerful, right? So it's a win-win for everyone. A veteran says, it's important to me to let them know, even though there were bad things that happened to me, there were also a lot of good, positive things I got out of the military, which is what Lonnie shares as well. So life is a mixed bag, right? Taking the good increases neuroplasticity. Thank you for that. Very true, because it's almost like that's a driving force for us to build our resilience And resilience overall has a very healing effect in our body because it builds us from inside out. It's not from outside in, but inside out, which also follows the properties of gravity because it's a lot easier moving inside out than outside in. So let's talk a little bit about what our current model is. And I'm sure, as you all know, the pandemic exposed a lot of things in our healthcare that we need to see reformed and really changed. And one of the things that it showed us is there's a lot of disparity, there's a lot of inequity, there's a lot of, things that need to be done much better at a systemic level. So we have to currently rethink our model. Right now, our model is what's the matter with you rather than what matters to you. And the VA has done a very good job of basing all the healthcare they provide for their veterans on the framework of whole health. Now, if you're familiar with the VA, or if you work for the VA or know somebody who's worked for the VA, ask them about this whole health framework. And it's a great framework because it starts from the point where it says, what matters to you rather than what's the matter with you? And it's based more on prevention, because when we promote health, we also prevent disease. So we are in the business of promoting health and preventing disease. So our current model is very sterile in the sense it's like, okay, what's your alcohol consumption? Are you a tobacco smoker? What's your this history, medical history, physical history, psychosocial history? But there's nothing about who the person is, where are they coming from, what makes them tick. So, and if you look at way old people way back in way back in the before Christ in the BCs. So here we've got Hippocrates, who was the father of medicine, and he was a great physician. Look what he says. He says, it's far more important to know what person the disease has than what disease the person has. How profound. And then there was Sir William Osler, who was a Canadian physician, and he's a founding father of Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. And look what he says. The good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease. So these concepts were very much alive even way back then modern medicine took shape. And now in a lot of places, we are trying to put person-centered expressions and phrases before the disease. So for example, we don't say somebody's autistic, we say somebody has autism. We don't say somebody's cancerous, we say somebody has cancer. We try not to say somebody's diabetic. They have diabetes and they're managing diabetes. So let's test our knowledge here. And there's a poll question too. So Ed, please, yeah, there you go. We've got the poll right here. So please take your, test your knowledge. Okay, we'll give it another 5 seconds and we'll close the poll. And the results are 100% the correct answer. So yes, all the above, just as we learned, stories are very effective because they focus on the person and not on the illness. And they are healing, they help the provider deliver humanistic care, and they improve provider patient satisfaction. So now we're going to jump into a few activities that I want us to do. And the reason for this activity is because one of the core principles of story writing and storytelling and listening to stories is what really matters to the person. So here at the VA, we use this very well to help take a personal health inventory and also personal health planning. So I would appreciate it if people participate in this and write down what really matters to you. You can share it in the chat, or you can hold on to what came up, what bubbled up for you. So hold on to the word, the phrase, because we're going to do a writing exercise. And why are we getting involved in a writing exercise? It's because sometimes we tend to think that, okay, writing is really not my cup of tea, or writing is something I can't do. But really, writing, everybody has that creativity and everybody has that potential. Sometimes we have to go looking deep inside ourselves and dig it out of ourselves and say, you know, it is there. So that's what this exercise is supposed to do. And actually, it's a little history behind this exercise. If you know Ernest Hemingway, he was a great American novelist. He was also a Nobel laureate in literature, and he wrote some great literary works called For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Old Man and the Sea, and some of his books were made into movies. So he was asked in a bar to write a 6-word memoir for his life. And this is what he came up with. He said, "For sale, baby shoes never worn." So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this in the chat, and then we're going to practice. I'll give you 2 minutes to start writing your memoir in 6 words. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Let's see if people want to share a few things they came up with. And you can put them in the chat. Okay, retired, simple yoga, nature-loving human. Very beautiful. Okay. It's not too difficult. Good hands and heart to heal. Very nice. All right, so keep it flowing. I know this is a creative activity, and even typing takes time. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. And we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of the My Life, My Story program. As you know, that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So this program started all the way in 2013 at the Madison VA Hospital. The Veterans Health Administration is a teaching hospital, so all the medical facilities are teaching. So that means we train our next generation of healthcare professionals from all lines, all professional lines. And we had some at this VA hospital, there were these psychiatry residents working, and one of them suggested that they ask veterans to tell their stories. So that could provide a better way to get to know the patients who were more ill or injured than the general population, because the psychiatry residents were trying to understand their patients a little bit better. So that's how the program was born. And so it was a need, right? And one of the adult learning principles that tells us as adults, we are generally motivated to learn when we are trying to solve a problem. So as a result, this program came about. And the basic elements of this program includes the goals of the program. So what is the goal of the program? Here, in this case, when it was developed initially, the goal was to better understand the population that was being served. And then there's the interview, which is really the meat and potatoes of the whole program. From start to finish, you have the interview, and then there's the writing of the story. But the interview is where you get all the materials to write the story. And generally, the stories are supposed to be concise, not more than 1,000 words. The story that I read to you, that you guys listened to, was a little over 1,000 words. It was 1,051 words, and it was in 2 pages. So there's a reason behind that, because we don't want the stories to go on and on forever, because the stories are incorporated in the electronic health records, so the providers can read it. And as you saw this, the numbers, the data says that 86% of the providers thought that it was a good use of their time. And then we have certain elements. So it's almost like before you start something, you have to put your ducks in a row. So you need the veteran, you need their permission. There's the interview, there's the write-up, there's the read back, and there's the edits. So this next slide shows you all the things that you may need. Of course, you're going to need the human people, which is the most important part of the storytelling. So you have to have the veteran or your clientele, and then you have to have the person who's going to be interviewing them. It's not necessarily a provider. It could be anybody. It could be a volunteer who's being vetted, who's got all the right privileges to serve in that agency. It can be a trainee, it can be a provider, it can be anybody who signs up or who wants to do this. Now, you see a picture of a recorder. It's just a recording device. It's an old-fashioned recording device. So I think in certain facilities, we have migrated to using more of the state-of-the-art equipment, like doing things, even interviews virtually. But this device, a recorder, is generally for a face-to-face meeting. And then in the middle, you see there's this brochure that informs the veteran about the My Life, My Story. And that is a form that is one of the consent forms that we have at the VA. So then it's important to determine the roles. You know, the person who's interviewing is the interviewer, and the person who interviews also generally writes the story. And there is a component of recruitment too, depending on which sector you're serving in, what is your clientele or population that you're serving. Having PR materials that informs a person what it is, and being able to distribute that so everybody knows that this is available to them. Generally, we have seen in the VA that about 50% people would agree to do it and 50% would not. So it's really average right now. Some of the other things that we have to be aware of is, best practice. Once you have the consent forms in file, it's important that a verbal confirmation be also done while the interview is going on. And you will see that. I will share a video of the interview process, at least a couple of, 3-4 minutes, so you understand how it's done in real time. Now, the story the interview is where the story is born. It's the first telling. And remember, if you hear one story, it is just one story, because every story is unique. And why is it unique? Because we are all unique people. We are formed by our experiences, by our language, by our culture, by our personalities, by many, many things that make us who we are. And that's why our story is rich and unique and very, very special to each one of us. So at this point, we're going to have a polling question. And while I haven't talked about active listening, we're going to take a, we're going to figure out how many people know about active listening. So go ahead and take the poll, please. Very good. Everyone got the correct answer. It's 100%, only 1 and 3, right? Listening on purpose and reading both verbal and nonverbal cues. As the research says, we know that 80% of our communication is happening non-verbally. It's only 20% that goes to what we, what we hear and what we are speaking, but 80% happens with non-verbal cues. So reading both of them and listening on purpose is actually active listening. So at the VA, we use something called the Interviewer's Guide. And what is that? That is just some best practices in a guide that's a one-stop shop for somebody getting into this for the very first time. Actually, we train people at the VA who are interested in doing that. So they attend a 2 to 4 hour training workshop to learn about My Life, My Story, as well as all the tools they will need. And one of the tools is the Interviewer's Guide. So basically it kind of guides them through questions. There's a repertoire of questions here that kind of tells you, if you're not moving ahead in your interview, you need to nudge somebody or whatever, these are some questions you can use. But of course, an interview is a very dynamic process. So it just depends how it is going in the moment and what kind of things can crop up. So this is something, if you are planning to start a program like this, having like a handbook or a simple manual, not something complicated like IKEA does, but a very simple manual that tells a person so they're not intimidated, because this can be an intimidating process. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about deep listening, and I'm going to read the full definition of deep listening. Deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of another person. You can call it compassionate listening. You listen with only one purpose: to help him or her to empty his heart. That's such a beautiful definition, and it really gets to the heart of deep listening. So what are we doing? And if you break down that definition, those are all the things that you're doing when you're deep listening. You're using your eyes, you're giving eye contact as much as it feels appropriate in that moment. You're using silence. Sometimes we're afraid of silence, but power of the pause is very powerful, because sometimes when you pause, it gives time to the person to recall memories, to remember things, or say some things that are really important in the story. Circling back is another technique where, like for veteran stories, they're very unique because their profession was very unique, right? And most of us who are civilians, who have not experienced the veteran life, we don't know much about the military jargon, the jargons related to Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the Army, the National Guards. There's just so many different jargons connected with the veteran life. So you can always circle back and seek more information or clarification, and that's learning. Now, emotion is also a big piece, because sometimes when a person is saying a very deep story, it can trigger other emotions in us as well. So it's okay to feel those emotions. It's okay to maybe become teary-eyed. It's okay to maybe to pause in that moment. And the one that really speaks to me is the bearing witness. the bearing witness is a very it's a heavy responsibility. It's almost like you are bearing witness to a person's story, and you're honoring that story just by listening and being present. So those are some of the components of deep listening. And it's important to always have that in the back of your mind, especially for the person who's doing the interview. Now, as we further talk more about the nitty-gritty, note-taking is also an important skill. And these are just some ways that people take notes. You can have a recorder, you can take notes, you can map the interview. Mapping the interview means being clear about timelines. So if you heard in Lonnie's story, she talks about, she refers to a date. She says 1955 or 1956 when she mentions her son, Michael, when she had that out-of-body experience, right? So mapping the interview is important. Circling back, for example, if you are not clear about some things, you come back to the portions. So all this takes place within that 60 minutes, plus or minus 5-10 minutes, but that's usually the guidelines for the interview times. Another thing is, you don't know who the person who's sharing the story, are they talkers or they're non-talkers? So you may have to use some of your things from your toolbox to help a person who's a talker to navigate them, and to nudge a person who's probably a non-talker in terms of, sharing more of their story. So now this particular slide talks about what if there are interruptions, there's refusals, there's visitors. So as you can see, this slide is really talking about a scenario. If you are doing an interview in an inpatient setting and the veteran has agreed, or a patient, if you belong to a hospital and you're a provider in a hospital, or you work in the hospital and you want to run a program like this, then these are some things to be cognizant about in that particular setting, because healthcare and receiving healthcare probably takes precedence over sharing of the story. So if you were in the room with the patient or the veteran, you may excuse yourself and allow them that private moment to talk to their provider and deal with their healthcare first before getting back to the story. And sometimes you may have to be creative. If the session has to be broken up into 2 different sessions, because it may be too much for the person, then it can be done. So what I'm trying to point out here is there are all kinds of ways to be creative with this. As long as you have the heart of storytelling, it can be created in any whichever way that fits your goal, your agency's goal, and your vision and mission for your population that you serve. Now, another big piece is the writing. So when you are in the interviewer, you're also taking notes, you're also writing, and generally the interviewer is the writer. And you're not just a transcriptionist, because you have that responsibility of writing the story in a way that brings out the voice of the person whose story is being told. So it needs to be non-judgmental. It needs to be written in first person and captures the voice. It's non-diagnostic, because we are focusing on what matters to that person. As you saw in Lonnie's story, what mattered to her husband. He was her soulmate, kind of her life partner all the way till 97 years of age when the story was written. For 73 years of marriage, through the ups and downs and highs and lows. They lost a son, but they were still together. How beautiful is that? So bringing that out is important. It's written in first person. And, you can also ask the question, what do I include and what do I omit? Quotes can be important things. Keeping the story short, 1 to 2 page, about 1,000 to 1,200 words maximum. And then there's always the writing considerations about what to leave out, what to tone down. So while we are not curbing free speech, sometimes we have to find a good balance. For example, when people are telling their stories and they had something impactful happen to them, then they can get emotional and use certain words, But if there's too much of that, you may want to tone it down a little bit. You may think of certain things to leave out, things that are kind of on the sidelines, like miscellaneous, like somebody's political ideologies that really are not shedding any light on the story. That can be left out. Any personal identifying information, and of course the names are changed in the story, so we maintain confidentiality and privacy. And no, none of the stories are shared. Nothing is shared without written permission and verbal permission from our patients and veterans. So now comes, once you're done with the story, you have to review the story. And this is a very unique way of reviewing the story. So once the story is written, you go and read the story to the person who told you the story, in this case, the veteran. So, and this is a very, very special moment, because now the veteran gets to read their story in first person. You are going to read the story to the veteran, but it's written in first person. And there have been anecdotal, feedback from the veterans is how powerful that was to them, because, some have wept, some have just been, amazed by the end product. They didn't know they had it within themselves, because a lot of times people don't participate in this because they think, what will I share? What will my story do good to anybody? But in this part of the program, when their story is read to them in first person, it's a very beautiful experience. It's just a bonding experience. It's just a healing experience. It's just an awesome experience. So people who are in this have told me that they have really, really, if they had been shy initially, but just doing this part, they have been sold with the program, because they're like, okay, I want to do my second one. It's almost like if you run a marathon, either you don't run it, you hate it, or you're like hooked on. So this is the part where it'll hook you on. Then what do we do with the stories once we have it? So the final approved story, once the veteran or the patient checks off and gives their blessings to it, and they say, okay, this is, and sometimes what has happened is we've had veterans want to have a longer version of their story, that they ask for printouts that they can share with their families. And the shorter version has been put into the health records. So this is just our health records. It's a copy of the health record that shows you where the story can go. You see where it says my story. Okay, and this is a story that was entered. Now I'm going to show you a quick video about, we'll play about a couple of minutes, and this, you get to see the person who is interviewing is the manager of the whole program nationally. And this is a veteran, and you can find this YouTube video on the website, on Google. And it's about 62 minutes long, but I'm only going to share a couple of minutes so you get an idea of how the interview started, what it looks like. So let me play that, and I'm going to come off video. So we will just.
Gene, I'm going to go ahead and record this, if that's all right with you. Okay, I'm going to start this up. This is so I can write up the story, and I'll get going. Okay, it's October 28th, 2014. It's 1 p.m. We're at the William S. Middleton Memorial Veterans Hospital here in Madison, Wisconsin. And my name is Thor Ringler, and I work with My Life, My Story program, where we interview veterans about their life stories. And today I'll be interviewing Mr. Gene Batchelor about his life story. And before we start, Gene, is it okay with you that I'm doing this interview?
Certainly.
Okay. And then I also want to note that in the room, videotaping this are Tweety Productions, Dan, Greg, and Sandy. And so we'll start from there. And I'm just going to put this over here. We can get going.
All right.
Okay, that's good. All right, so where would you like to start?
I was born in Platteville.
Okay, it's a good place to start.
Yeah. Went to school in Boscobel, Wisconsin.
And what year was that you were born?
I was born in 1943.
Okay.
I guess I'm like fine wine. The older I get, the mellower I get. Anyway,
And what about your parents? What did your mom and your dad do?
they were in the iron and steel business.
Okay.
Yeah. My mother would iron and my dad would steel.
Okay. What was your mom's name?
Ida.
Ida.
Ida Elizabeth, but they called her Betty. My dad's name was Harry. And he was quite a trap shooter. He won a lot of awards and that for being a trap shooter.
Did he make money doing that? Was that something he made?
Well, it wasn't a thing that he made money on. He just enjoyed doing it. I asked him one day, I said, how many pounds of shot have you shot in your lifetime? He said, about 2 tons.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And so, what did he do for a living?
He's a carpenter.
Okay. And was he in the military at all,
No.
your dad?
No.
Okay.
No, he, during the war, he worked for Woodward Governor. They were making propeller pitches for the big airplanes. So
And he got brothers or sisters?
I have 2 older brothers and
Okay.
1 younger, no sisters.
So you were the third one?
Yes.
All right, we are going to take our last poll. Stories are remembered up to blank times more than facts alone. So choose your best answer. That's pretty good. All right, you're gonna be surprised what the correct answer is. You guys were pretty close. The people who clicked on 20, actually the correct answer is 22. And stories are remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. Because we have so many things on our mind, our lives are so rushed, it's hard to remember facts, even if those facts are pretty incredible. But stories, we remember because they tend to resonate with us. They resonate with some of the important human traits that we all share. So that's why stories, hopefully this is a fact you'll remember after the fact that you were pretty close, the people who clicked on 20, but it was 22. Anyway, so I'm going to share some resources. You have it in your handout. These are some of the research papers that have come out based on the program that talks about how effective the program is, and will give you some more pointers regarding setting up your own program. This is some media websites, and I was probably going to show it to you guys. So you see this website, it's called Spreaker. It's a podcast, and it has different My Life, My Story, like 9 minutes, 10 minutes of different veterans. So you can access it right here and listen to their stories if you want. It's been featured on NPR as well. This is just a slide that shows that all the VA hospitals and facilities have adopted the My Life, My Story program, and it has really helped with patient-centered care and helped provider satisfaction, and also helped with healthcare outcomes. So we are at the end now, so I would like to invite any comments, reflections, questions, and I see that somebody put in their 6-word memoir: love of learning, family, culture, and nature. Very beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that. hopefully there are more people who took that writing activity, and you have something already in your pocket or ready to be used. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. You can put your questions in the chat. If you want to come off mic, whatever you want to do, please go ahead and ask questions. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you, Michelle, for putting that in. Yes, actually, we have at the VA, we have a abbreviated version of the My Life, My Story called a Take 15 program. So what we do, it's not the way you have posed the question, but it's between staff members. So we train people to be poets and write poetry or prose, and an employee who's wanting to share a little bit of their story within 15 minutes. So generally the interview runs for 15 to 20 minutes, and they share a little bit of their story, because 15 minutes is not going to do justice to anybody's story. But I'm a volunteer in that program. So I listen to the employee's story. I generally recommend, what is a story that you want to encapsulate as a poem or a prose? So share that, and it makes it easier for them to share that. And then it's written down as a poem or prose, and it's given to the staff person. And usually the responses that have come in is, it's a very nice activity. It's very cathartic. It's very therapeutic and healing. And it's both ways. There's great satisfaction with the person who hears the story and writes the poem, and the person who shares the story and anticipate, waits in a positive way to get their poem back. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. That's a great question. Storytelling is a great way to find out about patients and the actual issues that concern them. I use the method while working as a health educator, and found that patients have so much to share and very few people to listen. Very true. Thank you so much for putting that comment in the chat, because yes, it's just the health is one aspect of our lives. We are much more than the health problems that we come into a provider's office. And when you hear a story, you can also use it for motivational interviewing, because people who are trying to come in and be involved in programs, mental health programs or weight management programs, or any program that is requiring them to change their habits or requiring them to change their lifestyle, something that they want to improve on, then knowing their story helps you find the internal motivators. And that's why at the VA, we have the whole health program that always asks our patients and our veterans, what matters to you? And sometimes they will say, that's a pretty loaded question. Where do I go? And there are techniques to help guide people through that, because we haven't asked this kind of question from people, but the more we ask, people are going to get used to it, because it comes as a breath of fresh air. So any more? We have 2 minutes now. Okay, I have a question. Has my life story been used outside of the VA? Well, that is why you're here. So if you want to get off, come off mic and let me know which sector you're serving in, maybe I can further expound on that question with an answer. But as far as I know, that the tenets of this program can be used in any sector. It can be used in the social service, human services. It's going to be a very, very special, it's going to be a very useful program, especially in the mental health sector, because, or even in education. You mentioned having medical care come first, and that sometimes you might need to pause for a provider or do 2 separate sessions. Is the program done in the inpatient? Yes, we do the program in the inpatient setting, as well as outpatient setting, as well as in the medical facilities that are in the rural areas or in the suburbs. So it can be incorporated anywhere. there just has to be, first we need to let people know that this is available. And once they know it's available, then it's almost like knowing what's available in your menu. You can't pick an item in a menu if you don't know if it's available, right? So it's the same thing. So hopefully that answers your question. But we are at the hour, so I'm going to be respectful of people's time. But thank you so much for attending this session. Hope it was useful to you. It met your objectives. And have a great rest of your conference day. Thank you very much for attending.